Hello, my name is Joel Meganson. I'm one of the pilots with the museum, and Pete has asked me to make a short training video to help you guys through the process. Welcome to the T-28 Alpha training program. You'll find it one of the most rewarding experiences. Connecting with a vintage aircraft has proven to be one of the highlights of my last several years. So I hope you guys have a great experience with it. Enjoy it, work hard. What I'm going to do right now is talk about the notes, warnings, and cautions in the Dash 1. Specifically go through and kind of give you a concept of operations of how the Air Force makes their manuals, and then read the notes, warnings, and cautions. So I was an Air Force pilot for many, many years, and there are some significant historical connections between the way this particular manual is made, as I assume the F-35 has a manual that's set up. It's called a Dash 1. That's the tech order that pilots are issued to guide them through operating their aircraft. There's 9 sections in every Dash 1, and each section is laid out. 1 is systems, 2 is normal operations, 3 is emergency procedures, and so on. So that's what we have here. I'm assuming that you have your Dash 1 and that you've read it and that you've sat in the cockpit and got your time in the seat familiarizing yourself with what these controls are. And some disclaimers, might make mistakes. I've been flying it for about a year, and don't hold me if I don't get things exactly right. So this should last about 20 minutes. That's my goal, is to complete this in 20 minutes. All right, Dash 1. There are, in the very first chapter on page I-3, it explains what notes, warnings, and cautions are. Now, they're important because a warning is put in a big box, shadowed box, and it says an operating procedure technique which will result in personal injury or loss of life if not carefully followed. So that's the main reason why I chose this topic, is because it's something I would want. We can read them, we can talk about them, but this is just another way to get that information to you. Warnings are mostly written in blood, sadly, or have the potential to. A caution is a little smaller box, and it's an operating procedure technique which will result in damage to equipment if not carefully followed. And a note is an operating procedure technique which is considered essential to emphasize. So warning, injury to people or possibly death. Caution is about hurting the airplane, and a note is an essential technique. Okay, so here we go. And I would hope that you would have your Dash 1s out and you can just follow along with me. The first note is relative to the mixture lever in the system section, and it says fuel is injected into the engine if the booster pump is operating and the mixture lever is not in the idle cutoff position. So in our case with the Alpha, we have a fuel control, a handle by your left hip, and you also have a booster pump on the forward panel. So if you are not in the idle cutoff, you're getting fuel into that engine. Cowl and oil cooler flap switch. Note to regulate engine cooling when the switch is at close. The cowl flaps remain open approximately 1.5 inches on some aircraft and 3/4 on others, depending on which tech order modification has been accomplished. Chip detector warning system. Now this is a warning. Warning. If the warning light comes on in flight, a landing should be made at the nearest suitable field, referred to chip detector light in Section 3. So Section 3 is the emergency procedures checklist. Continuing oil system, negative G flight in excess of 10 seconds will cause cumulative engine damage. Oil system controls. Some aircraft have oil dilution systems, ours does not. On some aircraft, the oil dilution system is replaced by an emergency fuel system. That's what we have on our Alpha. Note for the fuel quantity gauge, fuel range per pound is the same regardless of fuel temperature. External power receptacle. To conserve battery, the battery switch should be off when external power is used. We're very conscious of our batteries because they're expensive. So in addition to making sure we don't drain our batteries, to help with that, we disconnect the batteries after we fly the plane. So if it's sitting in the hangar, that battery should be disconnected. You'll need a big screwdriver for that. And you'll need a big screwdriver for pre-flighting as well in the process. It always comes in handy. Okay, the attitude indicator, generally I don't use AC power when we fly the plane, but here's a warning concerning the attitude indicator. Accelerations or decelerations cause type J8 attitude indicator to show a slight amount of pitch error. So basically with acceleration, the attitude indicator will read falsely. Caution, the attitude indication gyros should never be caged to correct in-flight errors unless the plane is straight and level and by visual references from a true horizon. The compass, large errors caused by acrobatics or extreme pitch and bank attitude may be corrected by energizing the fast slave cycle. I haven't done that yet. Canopy, these are some warnings with the canopy. Warning, to minimize the possibility of engine exhaust fumes entering the cockpit, the canopy should be fully open when ground or flight operations are to be conducted with the canopy in a position other than fully closed. So no partial canopy uses. Open it all the way or close it. Canopy handle. After an emergency air opening, the canopy should not be closed until the system has been bled. If the canopy has been closed without this precaution, a subsequent emergency opening may be violent enough to damage the aircraft or cause injury to personnel in the canopy path. So that's a big one. Note when locking the canopy after closing, if the lock position is inadvertently passed, and you'll see it's a 3-position canopy handle, move the handle to the closed detent and press the button. This will close the canopy tightly. So closed, press the button. Then release the button and carefully move the handle to the locked position. If this procedure is not followed when the handle is pushed past the locked detent towards the open detent, the canopy may open enough to emit exhaust fumes in the cockpit. So we need our canopies closed. The exhaust stacks are about 4 feet from your nose. The canopy has a tendency to creep back, and it's recommended that the handle be actuated in a closed position and left there for flights with the canopy shut. By following the preceding procedure, hydraulic pressure will remain trapped in the system and provide a tightly closed canopy, thus eliminating the possibility of fumes entering the cockpit. Hydraulically actuated canopy. There's one warning for the external canopy handle. When the canopy is unlocked by use of the external manual canopy control handle, so you have access to the aircraft if it's been closed up. The handle must be pulled full out before it is moved to the manual position. Failure to pull the handle full out can set up an accidental pneumatic emergency opening, which can injure personnel in the path of the canopy and damage the plane. Shoulder harnesses. Note, pulling the shoulder straps from the inertial reel does not serve as a check of the automatic locking feature of the reel. Caution, before a forced landing, all switches not readily available with the harness lock should be cut before the harness lock handle is moved to the locked position. So turn your switches off before you lock your shoulder harnesses. So that's it for the systems part of the Dash 1. section 1. So now we're into section 2, and this is how we operate the aircraft for normal operations. The wing flap lever. Do not use the wing flap manual lever, which allows you to drop the flaps to full down so you can get in and out of the plane in case it didn't go all the way down. And that's all that does. But it says, caution, when entering the cockpit, do not use the wing flap manual lever as a handhold. The lever and flap control mechanism may be damaged. So it will have some mechanical advantage, and definitely don't use that as a handle getting into the cockpit. A warning just that was placed here for the exterior inspection, and it says check the airplane for general condition, all access doors and inspection plates for security, check aircraft surfaces for wrinkles, dents, loose rivets, oil, gas, and hydraulic leaks. The exterior inspection, as outlined here, is based on personnel having completed all post and pre-flight inspections as required. And there is a note. The exterior inspection, as outlined here, is based on maintenance personnel having completed all post and pre-flight inspection as required. So we have a wonderful group of volunteers and mechanics employees that will help us with that. Warning, ensure the control lock is stowed and locked. This is a warning. All right, so that means it's very, very important. And we will lock the controls when we're not flying the plane. If the control lock is not properly locked, negative G's could cause the lock to become engaged in flight, resulting in loss of control. So make sure the control lock is not only down, but it's locked down. Caution. Cockpit heater. Warning, the combustion heater should be off for all takeoffs because of the fire hazard involved. External power. To alleviate crankshaft damage and to provide smoother starting, external power must be used for all engine starts unless the aircraft is at a remote station, not having the required equipment, or during an emergency. So we will always start that particular plane on external power. If you're at an outstation, a lot of times the FBOs will have the power that we need, and it's not as, but we don't start the plane on the battery. Starting engines. Caution, if the engine appears to have unusually high compression during propeller rotation, indicated by uneven propeller rotation, discontinue starting procedures because fluid in combustion chambers can cause serious damage to the engines. Have the spark plugs removed, rotate the engine through 6 blades by using the starter. Never hand rotate the prop because the engine may be damaged. So that's a big one. Probably one of the biggest challenges I was learning this plane was the starting procedure. And it just takes repetition, chair flying, and about 3 hands. Other than that, you'll be fine. Clearing the engine after a start. Caution, the starter is limited to 3 consecutive starts of 30 seconds duration per start at 3-minute cooling periods between starts. If more than 3 starts are required, allow the starter to cool 30 minutes before using it again. Parts are difficult to find for this plane sometimes, and we are preserving them as long as we can. So please observe the starter duty limits. 30 seconds within a 3-minute, with 3 minutes cooling between the starts. So you've got a clock that works, use it. Warning, under engine ground operations, the carburetor air lever must be cold, filtered air if necessary, cold air, y'all, during all engine operations with power checks. Otherwise, erroneous air indications will occur. That's a warning. Caution, do not allow oil temperature or cylinder head temperature to exceed limits. Transitioning from turbine aircraft to this particular, it's my first radial engine aircraft to fly. It was another big challenge was engine maintenance and making sure we take good care and baby that big old radial out in front of us. Continuing comm nav check, special attention should be given with the altimeter to ensure that the 10,000 foot pointer is reading correctly. So make sure that you set your altimeter right. It's a big needle, small needle thing, and make sure you've set it correctly. Idle speed, this is a caution. Because of the natural resonance frequency of vibration isolators, engine operation between 850 and 1100 RPM should be kept to a minimum. This one's self-critiquing. It's generally, if you're in that range, you'll feel it starting, the harmonics start resonating, and you'll naturally just want to move the throttle not in that position. But 850 to 1100 should be kept to a minimum. Taxiing, if the aircraft is standing still, do not operate rudder pedals with nose wheel steering engaged because such action will cause undue wear of the nose wheel tire. Nose wheel steering, we don't use it. The differential braking is adequate in all scenarios. Technique, use the rudder pedal steering full down and brakes, and you'll find you'll turn a whole lot easier. So nose wheel steering with the rudder pedals and prudent uses of brakes. All right, warning about the nose wheel steering, which we don't use, but I'll read it anyway. Check nose wheel steering during taxi. If the nose wheel steering is inoperative, a takeoff should not be attempted. Failure of the nose wheel steering may indicate failure of the shimmy damper, possibly causing severe and uncontrolled nose wheel shimmy on takeoff and landing. So make sure the rudder pedals are turning the nose wheel. Engine run-up. Note, park the aircraft heading into the wind for engine run-up to aid in engine cooling. Note, this is during the run-up. There may be some fluctuations, and the average RPM will vary with altitude and temperature, but it will normally be in that 1850 to 2100 RPM range. Slight throttle adjustment may be necessary. If the engine quits after mixture lever is moved to idle cutoff, the emergency fuel system is malfunctioning and the flight should be aborted. That's during the emergency fuel check, and you can talk to Pete about the specifics on the emergency fuel check. All right, prolonged operation caution with the mixture lever at rich and the emergency fuel switch on will rapidly foul the spark plugs. For the takeoff, note the following procedures will produce the results shown in Appendix A. Appendix A is the performance data. Note, brakes and nose wheel steering may be used during the initial phase of the takeoff roll to maintain direction. Use of brakes will extend the takeoff roll slightly. After takeoff, here's a warning. If the left, after you take off, positive rate gear up, you need to look at the gear indications, and this is a warning. If the left main gear does not indicate up, there's a possibility that the strut has not extended and the scissors may be binding on the fuel lines. Therefore, do not attempt to recycle the gear. Lower gear and land as soon as practical. So put the gear up and check the gear indications and make sure they are up. Wing flap lever up. This is a caution. Do not retract flaps below 90 knots to prevent inadvertent sink. So 90 knots for a flap retraction, please. Continuing, okay, for the descent, caution, if the nature of flying conditions in descent require large power reduction, which we don't recommend. Reduce RPM as well as manifold pressure. For descents or other low power maneuvers or perhaps simulated engine failure, it's important to cushion the high inertial loads on the bearings which occur at conditions at high RPM and low manifold pressure. As a rule of thumb, it is well to remember that for each 100 RPM, approximately 1 inch of manifold pressure should be used. Example, 21 inches, 2100 RPMs on the way down. Operations at high RPM and low manifold pressure should be kept to a minimum. And just as a technique, I wrote my power settings on my glove, my takeoff settings, my climb settings, my cruise settings. And then the descent settings are you just match the RPMs and the manifold pressure. For landing, turn off the combustion heater for all landings because of the fire hazards. I've never turned it on, and I believe we just don't use our cockpit heater because it's fuel. For normal landings, do not apply brakes. This is a caution. Do not apply brakes until nose wheel steering is on the runway. Use rudder for directional control, and whenever possible, take advantage of runway length to save the brakes. Test brakes carefully before you need them for stopping, and apply them soon enough to avoid the need for abrupt braking. Refer to wheel brake operation in the -1 for additional information on the use of wheel brakes. RPM, this is the caution. RPM may hang up in the resonance frequency range during the landing roll because of air loads on the propeller. Excessive vibration may result. If this condition occurs, rapidly open and then close the throttle to eliminate the vibration. Just get it out of that range. Forward throttle travel should not exceed approximately 2 inches. Hold throttle in the closed position to prevent re-entering the vibration range. Crosswind landings, and note, aircraft on the ground acts like a weather vane and attempts to swing into the wind. Flaps increase this weather vaning tendency, so use the minimum degrees of flaps in a crosswind landing. And approach flap landings are permitted, but generally we land with full flaps. Min run landings, do not apply brakes until the nose wheel is on the runway to prevent slamming the nose wheel on the runway and damaging the nose gear, wheel, and tire. So no brakes till the nose is on the ground. Note, the technique required for minimum RPM landings should be developed through familiarity and practice of each phase before attempting the maximum results, obviously. A note on the overhead, it says refer to appropriate charts in Appendix 1 for touchdown speeds at varying gross weights. This is in the engine shutdown check. Do not close cowl flaps immediately after shutting down the engine because engine can be damaged by excessive residual heat. So cowl flaps open after you shut down. Before leaving aircraft, do not leave parking brakes set because of the possibility of seizure if brakes are overheated. So if you can put the chocks in, you can release the parking brake. Right. Another caution is to fill out the 781. That's the maintenance logs, which you can coordinate with the maintenance technicians at the museum. All right. Make appropriate entries covering any limits in the flight manual that have been exceeded during the flight. Entries must also be made if, in the pilot's judgment, the aircraft has been exposed to unusual and excessive operations such as hard landings, excessive brake actions during aborted takeoffs, long, fast landings, long taxi runs, and high speeds. So make sure if something happens when you're flying that you notify maintenance and that they are aware of what happened in the plane and that there's a record of it, because that's important and we all fly. And that is the notes, warnings, and cautions in the first 2 sections. And we've been about 21 minutes, and I'll end with that. Good luck with your flying. It's, again, a very rewarding experience. It requires a lot of study, a lot of chair flying, and in the end, it's perpetuating the mission of our great flight museum. Thank you very much. Stay classy.